Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As you can see, I'm not muted here. As you can see, we have a new setup here. Actually, not new because this is the camera that we usually use on Sundays, but it will give me the chance to stand up, maybe move around a little bit. If the energy starts to stir, it gives me a little bit more room to dance, maybe even sing. Never know what's going to happen at Namaste Village. So here we are. We're going to take a couple of deep breaths, and as we started on Friday, we're going to be praying one of the peace prayers from one of the 12 major religions of the world. And today we're going to be sharing the Buddhist peace prayer. So let's take a deep breath together. See if we can settle into that Buddha consciousness. To know we are one. One with each other, one with all. That perfect centered place of oneness. See if you can feel the essence of this prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued with sufferings of body and mind, quickly be freed from their illnesses. May those frightened cease to be afraid. May those bound be free. May the powerless find power. And may people think of befriending one another. May those who find themselves in trackless, fearful wildernesses, the children, the aged, the unprotected, be guarded by beneficent celestials, and may they quickly attain Buddhahood. May they quickly attain Buddhahood. It doesn't really matter what tradition we're speaking of, whether it be the Buddhist, the Hindu, the Christian, each one of them has that representation of that oneness consciousness. In the Buddhist tradition, they'll call that Buddhahood or Buddha consciousness. In the Christian tradition, they'll call it Christ consciousness or I am consciousness. What was that?
Christhood.
What do they call it in Hinduism? They call it Brahma consciousness. Do you know, Ravi? Shiva consciousness. We'll just say one, the consciousness of one. Whatever tradition we're speaking through and of, it's seen and known only the one. We can describe it in many ways. We can call it by many names, but it's still one. Now, these prayers that we're praying in the morning now, many of you may know the story, but some of you may not, how they came about and where they were first gathered. Raise your hand if you don't know that story. Okay, I'll tell you real quick. So this was back in 1986. I think it was November 7th. I could have the date wrong. For the first time in history, Pope John Paul II called all the leaders of the different religions of the world together in Assisi, because St. Francis has always represented that interreligious, interspiritual communion based on some of the work that he did, in particular when he went to the Sultan of Syria to try and end the Crusades. So he was the first interreligious peacemaker. So the Pope called this meeting in Assisi, and all the different leaders came, the Dalai Lama, all the different leaders from the different religions came to Assisi, and they prayed the peace prayer from each of their traditions in a big ceremony in the plaza by the Basilica. And it was an historic event, and a friend of ours, Louis Randa from Boston area, he had a place called the Special Peace Corps. And he just happened to be there accidentally almost, because His school was for children and adults who were developmentally disabled. And one of these children had died, and his wish was to have his ashes strewn across the landscape of Assisi, because he loves St. Francis. So Lewis brought him, not knowing that at the same time he would be there, this historic gathering would be taking place. So he was so moved by it. I guess he had the program that had all the peace prayers on it. And he brought that program back to Boston. And he made these little rosaries and that had 12 beads on them and a medallion of either St. Francis or Gandhi. And he began passing out these prayers. Well, a few years later, someone handed me a copy. I'm still trying to remember if it was Vicky or our friend Claire. I know one of them gave me the prayers, the other one gave me the beads. Maybe Vicky can talk to us about that in a moment. But it was one of them who said, this is who you are. This is what you represent. These prayers. So I took them, and I remember at first I put them in my drawer, and it was maybe a couple of days later I took them out. And I began reading each one, beginning with the Hindu prayer of peace. Oh God, lead us from the unreal to the real. Oh God, lead us from darkness into light. Oh God, lead us from death to immortality. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti unto all. We shared that on Friday. And as I began to read each one of these prayers, I heard music. And at first I thought the music was coming from a different room. I picked up my guitar and I began to play along, and it was beautiful. And I effortlessly, as if it was already put to music, I just sang the Hindu prayer of peace. So I began to read the Buddhist prayer, just as we did here, and the same thing happened. Then the Jainist prayer, the Zoroastrian prayer, the Muslim prayer, one by one, until within 1 hour, all 12 of the prayers have been put to music. And that was the beginning for me. This was in 1994. And I decided that I was going to be the peace troubadour, and that a peace troubadour should be willing to go to where peace is needed. And I was invited to come to Bosnia and Croatia about a year later. And next thing you know, here we are at Namaste Village. So it's amazing what happens just through a simple series of prayers, of dedication to oneness. They are simple. They're not complex, but they're whole and they're real. So that's why I thought it might be nice to share some of these prayers in the morning. We might do them in different ways as we go through, but we'll start by just sharing each one so we can get an inter-spiritual feel, because that's what we claim here at Namaste Village. And I want to share also some 1-minute miracle lessons that come from another very interesting person, someone who was also very interreligious. And his name, you may know him, is Anthony de Mayo. Some people say Anthony de Mello. I see people, yeah, we love him. Very interesting cat. He was from India, and he was a Jesuit priest. So he was able to so beautifully merge Eastern thought with the Western tradition. And he would tell stories and he would laugh, and his wisdom was so clear. If you've never read any of Anthony de Mayo's books, check them out. And I just recently found one that's each page is a 1-minute piece of wisdom. So I want to share some of these throughout the next weeks and use these as our jumping off point. For example, this is how the book starts. It says, the student came to the teacher and said, "Is there such a thing as 1-minute wisdom?" "There certainly is," said the master. "But surely 1 minute is too brief," the student said. "It's actually 59 seconds too long." To his puzzled disciple, the master later said, "How much time does it take to catch sight of the moon?" "Then why all of these years of spiritual endeavor?" the student asked. The teacher responded saying, "Opening one's eyes may take a lifetime, but seeing, with a capital S, seeing is done in a flash. Seeing what is true is done in an instant." We may have to do the work that takes time, or at least it seems to take time. That's why we join together here every day. We're simply removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, block by block, sometimes shovel by shovel, sometimes big shovels, sometimes teaspoons. But we're removing those blocks to the awareness of love. And when they're finally moved away, seeing, with a capital S, happens in an instant. So that's the beginning. And I want to actually read what Anthony writes at the very beginning of his book, so we can have an idea of where he's going with all of these lessons. He says, "The master in these tales is not a single person. He's a Hindu guru, a Zen Roshi, a Taoist sage, a Jewish rabbi, a Christian monk, a Sufi mystic. He is Lao Tzu and Socrates, Buddha and Jesus, Zoroaster, I can never say this one, Zoroastrian religion, the guy who founded that, Zoroaster, and Muhammad. His teaching is found in the 7th century BC and the 21st century AD. Her wisdom belongs to the East and to the West alike. Do her historical antecedents really matter? History, after all, is the record of appearances, not reality, of doctrine, not silence." Isn't that beautiful? It will only take a minute to read each of these antidotes that follow. You will probably find the master's language baffling, exasperating, even downright meaningless. But alas, this is not an easy book. It was written not to instruct, but to awaken. Concealed within its pages, not in the printed word, not even in the tales, but in its spirit, its mood, its atmosphere, is a wisdom which cannot be conveyed in human speech. As you read the printed page or hear these stories and struggle with the master's cryptic language, it is possible that you will unwittingly chance upon the silent teaching that lurks within the book and be awakened and transformed. This is what wisdom means, to be changed without the slightest effort on your part.
No. Okay.
George, you got unmuted. I got you though. To be changed without the slightest effort on your part, to be transformed, believe it or not, merely by waking to the reality that is not words, that lies beyond the reach of words. I love what he says here, that it's in the spirit, it's in the mood and the atmosphere. This is not an easy book. It was written to instruct, not to instruct, but to awaken. Each one of these stories is like a seed. And if we water each one of these seeds with our own longing, even with our own tears, each one of them will begin to take root. And they'll teach us something that we already know. They're simple lessons. It's not about what we're taught, but what we hear. It's been fun for me over the last few days reading all of the reviews of the non-dual universe that have come through, almost 200, and 195 of them have been all perfect star. People who are saying, I'm finally able to hear this because this is being presented in a way that's not intellectual, but deeply experiential. And I read one last night from someone who gave it 1 star. The only person actually who gave it 1 star. And she said, don't we use the mind? Aren't we here to use the intellect to understand these things? And the answer is no. Lay the intellect aside when you hear these stories. Lay the mind to the side when you read a book like The Non-Dual Universe, because if you do, you'll stop judging it. You'll stop trying to figure out the lessons, and you'll let them figure you out. For example, let's read one more story from Anthony and see where that takes us. A man traversed land and sea to check for himself the master's extraordinary fame. What miracles has your master worked? He said to a disciple. Well, there are miracles and there are miracles. In your land, it is regarded as a miracle if God does someone's will. In our country, it is regarded as a miracle if someone does the will of God. Isn't that beautiful? What is a miracle? So often we think, just as we heard in this story, that a miracle is when we pray for something. Dear Lord, please remove this, give me that, whatever it may be, and it works. We have forced God to do our will. But is that really what the miracle is? Could it be much more simple than that? Us doing the will of God? And what is that will? Anyone have an idea?
Love.
To love. Just that, to love one another. To realize how lovable each one of us really is. To see one another, to truly see each other as whole and as complete. Then we're doing God's will. And isn't that the greatest miracle? I think so. So we'll share some of these stories over the next weeks. I know that tomorrow and Wednesday, Johannes is going to be joining us. So we might do something a little bit different, because she has a couple of ideas of what she'd like to share. And whatever Johannes wants, Johannes gets. Just ask Jack. But I'd love to hear from our dear sister Vicky and hear what she'd like to share. So are you out there, Vicky? And I'll begin by asking you, do you remember giving me either those beads or that piece of paper? And was it you or Claire that gave me them?
Yes, James, Brother James, I'm right here. Claire gave you the words to the prayers. Then you were so excited I gave you the beads. We were all living at the academy in Wisconsin, and it was one of the best, clearest demonstrations of how grace worked, because they so immediately opened your heart. And I was the first person, you came running down the hill to sing them to us, said, must be Mary inspired you. And you sang them right through, one right after the other, like you had been singing them all your life. And what a great example of when we do God's will, everything's a miracle. Whatever is ours to do comes and flows through us, and we can't wait to do it and give it away. And all these years, whether it's recently doing all the books you're doing or what happens at Namaste Village, it's been an act of grace that has flourished everything with really effortless ease. So great example, Brother James, great example. And I would say to your non-dual 1-star reporter there, she should pick up the Course in Miracles. She wants to use her mind. That gives you 1,300 pages of explanation that satisfy even the most difficult, twisted person that would have an interest a wonderful, and just like you said, like Tony DeMello says, it's not the healing or the awakening that takes any time, but the willingness to let it come to us. Like healing seems to take a long time and very often does, because we're reluctant to give up our control and owning everything that happens to us, rather than looking with wonder and not judging appearances. So it takes us a long time. And the word is forgiveness, forgiving the appearances. Things are not what they seem. That can take a long time to give up our judgment of how things appear to be. But the healing happens in an instant. The instant we are willing to let our ideas go and stand like that your famous prayer with holy empty hands unto our Lord. Just stand there and be open. That's the healing that takes an instant. And Tony DeMello, and I'm not saying his name correctly, I guess, but he is on YouTube for those of you that are asking what his name is, and you can see him, and his talks are refreshing and inspiring. And he ran a Jesuit, as you know, retreat center for the Jesuits all over the world. So what a position that Grace put him in to open up the minds of brothers that are very intellectual and heady. And he was totally loved and beloved. But in any case, here we are on the threshold of awakening. And sometimes it may seem like it takes a long time, but when we join together with the one purpose of God's will is ours, nothing more, nothing less, nothing else, then that moment of awakening is that present peace that we all experience, and we do. Maybe we dismiss it too lightly, but any moment of love and that feeling of peace where we just rest and relax, that's a moment of awakening. So together we can recognize it, and together we quicken it. That's what, just like a word in a book, or a little 1-minute story by Tony DeMello or Jesus or Buddha or anyone, that's what the Zen koan was set up to do. Zen koans were to trick our mind into loosening its grip on judgment, loosening it so those moments of love can happen. But we recognize that. So as we pay attention and recognize the moments of love and of resting into a natural peace, those are moments of awakening. And as we recognize it, nurture it, it expands until it's our only way of being here in time. And that's what we're all working on, that consistency. And sometimes it may be total miraculous revelatory moments, and other times it may just be the sweetest fragrance of a flower that lights us up. But wherever the love lands, that's what awakening is, because love is maximal. There's no little bit of love. Love is what it all is. So Brother James, thanks for all that history and example. Thanks.
Thank
Love
you.
you all.
Vicki, it's always so wonderful to start off our week with you, and all together joining as one. And as you were sharing, the word that kept moving through me was breakthrough. That's what these lessons are all about, breaking through. And breaking through or breaking free only takes an instant. But sometimes we have to get back really far in order to run and build the momentum so that we can have that breakthrough. And it seems to take time, but it's really only an instant. And that's what I love about these stories. And the fact that this was a Jesuit priest speaking to Jesuit priests. You've never met a group more intellectual than Jesuits. You don't have 3 doctorates, you're looked down upon when you're a Jesuit priest. I know, because I was educated by Jesuits at Loyola University. But I also remember when I first went to Loyola, I was with the Franciscans. So I would be with the Franciscans, and I would go to school and go back and forth. And I remember once going to my theology professor, who was a Jesuit, and I said, I wanted to share a story with you that I heard this morning at the friary. He said, oh, I would love to hear. Is this a story about Franciscans? And I said, well, yeah, kind of. It's the story about a brother Juniper who has died, and he shows up at the pearly gates of heaven, and he knocks on the gate, and suddenly the gate opens, and there's St. Peter, and he sees brother Juniper, and he says to him, oh, Juniper, it's so good to see you, but you need to know that Franciscans, they always enter through the back part of heaven. All you need to do is just keep walking around, and you'll come to a small wooden door. Just knock and someone will let you in. So very humbly, brother Juniper walks all the way around to the back, and he sees the door, and he knocks, and the door opens, and there's St. Francis. And brother Juniper is so happy. Francis is there to greet him and wraps his arms around him and welcomes Juniper into heaven. So Francis takes him into heaven, which is like a huge theater in the round, and the Franciscans are way in the back, of course. And no sooner does Juniper sit down when suddenly there's a trumpet blast and the pearly gates open, and there's a procession of angels and saints carrying in a Jesuit who has just died and is now coming into heaven, right down the aisle. And Juniper is watching this, and he's confused. And so he turns to Francis and he says, I have no issue with the way I came in, no problem. But why, when this Jesuit comes, does he get this? And Francis says, brother Juniper, Franciscans, they come here every day. This is the first Jesuit in 300 years. I think the moral of the story is this does not come through the mind. You can have as many doctoral degrees as you want. That's the beauty of having these lessons come through this beautiful Jesuit priest who was clearly in the full experience and the full rapture of grace. He knew, he probably came through the back door himself. Anyway, that story came into my mind, so I thought I would share it. Let's take a deep breath together and feel the joy of this awakening. Feel the joy of this experience and of knowing that the moment has at last arrived. We are breaking through. We are breaking through into the light, the heaven that we never left except in our imagination. It happens in an instant. We've been doing the work for what seems to be a long time, but now we rest in God. We take that final step into heaven itself, knowing that we are home, that we are loved, and that we are awake now. And so it is. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and we will close with our prayer of protection. How does that sound? Let me go ahead and share the screen. This is kind of different for me to be standing up doing all of this, but it's working all right. Here we go. Ready? The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever God is, I am, and all is well. Amen, 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 y punto. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Monday. We'll be back with
Thank you.
Reverend Johannes tomorrow.
I love you all.
Have a great day.
Namaste.
Blessings.
Bye-bye
I
for
love
now.
you right back.